Welcome to Cove, Wellbeing and the My Trauma, Your Trauma series with me, Owen Morgan. I want to share my trauma journey and that of others. We will also look at the world of trauma healing, support and research, including guests who specialise in helping those overcome their trauma. My Trauma, Your Trauma is here to explore human experience. Welcome to Trauma Chat, where we invite on a guest to talk all things trauma. Please watch and listen with care. Some of the content may be triggering or may make you feel uncomfortable, so do press that stop button and take a break. Always put yourself first. We're filming this around the time of the worldwide pandemic, and more than ever, we need conversations like this to happen, especially around trauma. This is the finale episode of Series 1. I can't believe it. 10 episodes in. I'm really excited to finish today's episode with an amazing guest. I'm here today with Simon Jacobs, who is a psychotherapist, counsellor and coach, and he's also an accredited supervisor to other therapists and coaches. He works from London's Regent Street, and he is also available online, even more so now, of course, with the pandemic and everything that's happening. So, welcome to the show, Simon. How are we doing today?
Very well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm honoured to be the last on this series.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's just the way it panned out. You've ended up being number 10. So it's worked out as I think it had to, which is brilliant. And obviously we were introduced by Kenny, who's been on previous episodes before, and it's just great to keep great company with amazing men. So thank you for joining us. How's lockdown been for you? I presume in your business you've probably been fine client-wise.
Yes, I've been extremely busy. And it's been interesting to watch the way people are affected by lockdown. A huge range of responses. Some people really finding it very, very difficult, alone with their own feelings, often no way of diluting things that are coming up for them. And then other people who are seeing it as a kind of sabbatical and an opportunity to reflect. And then a whole range of responses within those two polarities. So it's been really interesting. I feel a lot of papers are on their way from my field post pandemic on how we manage our feelings in sort of seclusion.
Yeah, it's certainly affected people in different ways, good, bad. There's been lots of gratitude too, loads of beautiful community stuff happening, and also a crazy amount of loneliness too. And like you said, some of us find it difficult to sit with our feelings, our emotions, our traumas, and we've been kind of forced into having to do that. So it's been a delicate time, but I'm hoping that we can all come out of this the other side better for it. I hope, I really do. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about your work with your clients and your approach to supporting those with their trauma recovery. But before we do that, if you just want to let people know a little bit more about you, as in your background in your training and what you're up to now, kind of what does life look like, and what does your work involve in brief?
Sure. Well, right at the moment, because of the lockdown, obviously I've been working solely on online, so that's been interesting. Although I did do some beforehand, but the work online has been, and shifting from face-to-face work has been quite a challenge, I would say. Not being in the room with people is difficult, and yet for some people I notice it seems to feel a little safer to not be in the room. So there's some curious stuff happening. I'm very busy with individual clients and couples. I run a men's group online, and that's worked extremely well, moving from being in a circle of men in a room to online, which surprised me. I really had reservations about that, and it's working extremely well. So I guess I would say generally, in terms of the work that I'm doing, beforehand, before the lockdown, the sorts of people that were coming to see me were typically quite high-flying professional people who probably very high-functioning, but underneath it all, a lot of complex trauma quite often. And I would say that high-flying people who are, really successful in their careers are often very, very good at pushing themselves beyond their pain barrier, and the fear that runs underneath that is trauma-based often. So, if you could say always. I guess that's a typical profile of a sort of client that I'm working with.
It's interesting you say that. Thank you for the high functioning side, because sometimes people tend to think about, if they've had a lot of trauma in their life or abuse as a kid or whatever it may be, people tend to think, well, inevitably then you'll be shut down, alcoholic, drugs. But I was a very high functioning person after a lot of child abuse, and I was the heart and soul of the party. Animated, everybody loves Owen, such a cool guy. But I was a complete mess underneath all of that. So there is a way to come out of trauma and abuse situations and become this high functioning, disassociated person. And eventually, from experience, it wipes your nervous system out completely. You just end up having a complete breakdown eventually, because your body can't sustain hiding so much of itself and also pushing so much of itself. So I'm glad you said that, because it correlates a lot with my life, which is amazing. So what we tend to do on the show before we do anything else is I like to get a little insight into what people think trauma is. So I can't wait to hear your answer. But the whole series I've asked people the same question. So for you, what is the definition of trauma? What is it from a human experience perspective?
It's a very interesting question. I would say that trauma is the experience of feeling unsafe, and in a way that the body has taken over control of the sense of feeling unsafe and is overriding our mental ability or our psychological capacity to work out what is happening. So the system, the safety system in the body, has taken control and is in some way, sometimes very subtly, is running the show. I guess that's how I would think of trauma in its simplest definition.
Yeah, that's a really nice. Everyone said it slightly differently. I really, really like the way you said that, and everybody said it in a really good way, just with a slightly different language, and that kind of overwhelming of the system, and it taking over and doing what it needs to do. And like you said, it doesn't have to be huge, does it? It can be little levels of trauma, but it has the response doesn't change. The response is the same. There's just different levels of it, and that can obviously determine our future, which of course we'll talk about today. So yeah, thank you for that. That's awesome. So from your own perspective in your own life, have you experienced any mental health issues or any traumas in your life from birth to now?
Yes, and that's really why I think I've ended up working in the area that I do and with the kinds of clients that I do, because I was a high functioning person from the advertising world. I was a creative director for a good deal of my career before I retrained to be a therapist some 20 years ago. And I recognised that when I began my own therapy after the first of a number of existential crises, I would say, that I had been doing exactly what you described at the beginning of our talk, which is I looked like I was doing extremely well. And underneath it all, I think even I thought I was doing quite well until I became somewhat overwhelmed by a difficult crisis relationship-wise, and which coincided with other pressures. And I guess, children coming along, I had young children, had risen up to quite a high position within the advertising agency, relationship problem. It all came together at the same time. And I had a sort of collapse, I would say. I mean, it wasn't particularly visible, but I knew it was happening and I knew I needed to confront it. And when I went into therapy, I recognized very quickly that my whole life I'd been kind of living at this surface level, and there was this great turbulence inside me that just hadn't really been able to acknowledge. And at times it was running the show to such an extent that I wasn't even aware that it was running the show. I mean, that's what's so clever about complex trauma, is the way that it is the splitting involved, so that you don't really know what's happening. And it was the shocking revelation, really, that happened very quickly in my therapy when I started, that my whole life I'd been struggling with difficult feelings going on under the surface, and had been created such an effective way of hiding it that nobody knew, and not even me until that point.
Yeah, thank you. And I think sometimes our stories, our narrative, that we tell ourselves, I think if you do it for long enough, they become belief systems, don't they? And you kind of hook into them, and you kind of kid yourself to the point that you actually, like you said, you believe that you're absolutely fine. And it's that narrative we get hooked into. There's no space to reflect or space to come inward. I think for people like me that have been in high function environments like that, you do. I couldn't understand why I was so depressed at home to a certain point, but then I kept getting promoted at work, and I was like organising all the staff parties, but then I'd go home and just be straight into my gut, feeling absolutely terrible. And it's like this it's exhausting playing those kind of two roles, And I was listening to Body Keeps the Score again the other day, because that's my favourite book ever. And he's talking about sort of the dual existence that we tend to carry with us. So all of the memory recall and the traumas that you've had that have been stored in your body, you have that existence of what's happening, then your existence in this moment, what you're doing now, and, your cognitive functioning, what you're doing in your life and work and stuff. And you have this dual existence. And until those two can come together as one, it's very hard to find peace. I thought that was a really lovely way to think about it. Dual existences, that made total sense to me. And I was like, that's really, really lovely, actually. And I guess so much of healing is bringing those together to be friends once again, which is really lovely. So what did you do? So when you started to sort of get to that deep part of you, where did you go first to get support? Is that informed what you trained in? Or did you get different therapies?
It did, yes. I ended up working with someone who was working very experientially with me in what I subsequently found out was probably a Gestalt therapy way of working. And I was just awestruck, really, by the creativity of it, being able to... I'd had experiences of probably something closer to psychodynamic or psychoanalysis many, many years before, which I hadn't got on well with at all. And I found it quite austere, and difficult to understand how to relate to someone who was very, very boundaried, very didn't self-disclose or give much of themselves away. And then I met this therapist who brought a lot of himself into the sessions. He got me out of the chair. He had me shouting and screaming and bashing pillows and getting in touch with my inner child. And it just clicked with me immediately. And I remember thinking fairly soon into the therapy, I want to be in your chair. This is for me. I don't really know quite how I came to that conclusion, but some part of me recognised that that's where I should be. And it's amazing to think, actually, that from that point, I quite quickly went and signed up to a training at the Gestalt Centre, completed the training back in 5 years back to back, and then quite quickly after that had a practice up and running. And I really don't know to this day quite how I did it. It was a bit like the parting of the Red Sea. Just everything I did just seemed to fall into place. It really did feel like it was my destiny to end up in the chair. And I feel very, very lucky to have got there.
Oh, it's really wonderful. I've heard this story time and time again with people I interview that are in the sort of therapist-based world, practitioner world, and they all say a similar thing. It's just there's something about going through that journey that becomes so intrinsically part of who you are that you want to then become that, and it's amazing. I think we wouldn't have all these amazing therapists if it wasn't for all of their actual struggles and traumas that they had. It makes them very empathic and able to help people. But like you said, who you choose as a therapist is, God, it's so huge. You know, if we think that having safety is so vital for a healing journey, you need to feel safe with your therapist in a relationship sense, but also that you can relate to the discipline, the modality you're receiving, and feel safe with that modality. So I guess some of them, like you said, are very boundary and structure based. And if you get really triggered by too much structure, then that's not the one for you. So it's kind of knowing your limitations and what you can work with. It's not easy. I'm not saying you can just go online and pick one that looks good. That's not how it works. You need to get out there and try. I certainly did, which is amazing. So when you then sort of walk through that, and it sounds like you went through this amazing Red Sea 5-year experience, when you sort of chose what you were going to do, was it super informed basically by what you'd received? Because, you know, the combination of psychotherapy, the counselling and the coaching, it feels like you've tapped into like a very awesome spectrum there of potential things you can tap into. So is that kind of how it works? You use bits and bobs depending on who you're working with?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I've become to recognise that I am very much a magpie the way that I work, and in a way that sort of that just reflects the way I experience the world, which is that I tend to dip in and out of things. I'm drawn to something, I'll take a bit from there. I'm drawn to something else, I'll take a bit from that. And I've always thought of myself as rather a jack of all trades rather than a master of one. I guess in a way, I might even say that the way my nervous system has been shaped by my early trauma means that I have a tendency to flit, and I've learned how to use it to my advantage. And I think as a boy, that capacity to be able to make myself very flexible and move around and take a bit here and a bit there was probably a survival strategy that I've somehow managed to refine in a way as a therapist to work in a particular way, which suits an integrative style in a way, I would say, if you were going to put a name to it. The core training was Gestalt, and that really is where my heart is. But I like to dip in and out and take other, a bit of TA, bit of person-centered, bit of psychodynamic, constellations work, systemic work. I mean, we'll talk about it, I'm sure, but that's all in there. But I think if I go back to when I began my training and what informed my choice with Gestalt, it was probably the fact that I had done this very, very experiential work. And then I'd gone and done the Mankind Project. So I'd gone and done the New Warrior training, which is very, very dynamic and very, you really go through a weekend of going right down into the depths of despair and coming up into a state of elation at the end of it. Very, very dramatic, very experiential. And that work, I think, meant that I was ready for something like Gestalt that was very active, creative, and not just in the chair. And that stayed with me, I think.
Yeah, it sounds like it must be very sort of body-based because, you know, time and time again, you know, I listen to books rather than read them, so I listen to many books. They talk a lot about this, you know, that of course there's a place for the cognitive side, of course there is, and, you know, recalling stories that have happened to you, all that kind of stuff. Cognitive obviously plays a part, but time and time again, we're seeing the importance of coming into our body, feeling what we're feeling and being able to hold the space safely to process. Maybe like from a somatic experiencing perspective, do movements that, actually, I'm going to ask you this off the cuff. So a lot of the somatic experiencing stuff that Peter Levine is involved in, he talks a lot about completing the trauma physically through the movement that you replicate at the time. So if someone was being sexually abused, but you didn't have the ability to push them away, so you shut down, you would act a very gentle, caring, soft, safe way of pushing with that movement, pushing hands outwards. And people can then shake in that moment, burst into tears, and it kind of completes an action, a physical twitch, shall we say. So what's your thoughts on kind of completion work through the body?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because that really is what Gestalt therapy is all about. It is about finishing business. It is about completing the initial response, if you like, which in the theory would say that has been in some way arrested. It's and that we are stuck in a fixed gestalt where we can't quite complete whatever that response was. So, and I love Peter Levine's work. He's definitely been one of the people that I have drawn from. So I would say an example would be if I'm working with someone who is clearly very angry and not very in touch with their anger, because there might be very strong introjects in their story about anger not being something that you're allowed to express. You might notice the way in which they stifle their anger through their breathing. You might notice, often I see people with a clenched fist, for instance, as they're talking, and I might ask them what do they notice about that? What's happening as they're talking about something that could potentially have made them very angry, but they're really not in touch with. To go a bit further with that, let your fist do something. It looks like it's doing something. Just become aware of it and see where it wants to go, very gently, but just taking your time and seeing what wants to happen next. And then they might start pushing a little bit into their hand, and it's just getting them in touch with, as you say, the response that has been somehow arrested, usually through some introject in the family that it's not, say, safe to express your anger. And sometimes that can end up with something quite dramatic, beating a cushion. It might do, but more often than not, it doesn't really need to go that far. It's more just the initial awareness, and then beginning gently to move. But as you've said, safety is the key to this, and that isn't a process that can happen so quickly. It needs a lot of time, a lot of relationship building, a lot of trust. But I think the art is to be able to keep an eye on what's happening in the client and not being taken with the story. And that's where I think I've learned a lot about working that way, particularly since the training ended and I began to read people like Dan Siegel and Bessel van der Kolk and Peter Levine about, just allowing the body to do the thing it wants to do.
Yeah, there's a few points that came up when you're talking. I'm trying to remember them all now. This is what happens with me on these interviews. I pick up lots of little insights. But I just wanted to touch on something about what you said there. They say with trauma, sometimes it's not the trauma that you've taken with you. It was the response to trauma that's stuck in you. So you take the response with you, and that's what keeps tripping you up. And it's dealing with that response. And like you said, it's not always bash, bash, bash. Sometimes it's a soft movement pattern. More often than not, they talk about, a very slow version of the movement is actually more powerful because you bring all your awareness and all your engagement to the movement. And I actually use that in my massage work. So I'm going to quickly share something with you briefly about my massage work. So for years, I gave people stretching exercises. That's kind of standard. But I was like, this isn't really getting them anywhere. They're stretching it out for a bit. And that's retightening. But then I started looking at some Peter Levine stuff about awareness of a certain muscle group and then activating the muscle group very slowly, but taking it through its whole range of movement. So you're kind of reconnecting your mind, your muscle, everything together in a very fluid way. So I get them to move very slowly in that movement. So reach down, touch your toes. Very slowly. You do it 5 times, and each time you slow it down. But the whole time you bring all your awareness to the point you want to work on. So say it was my lower back, and I've given it time and time again to people with back problems, and they come back on the next session and go, holy shit, like I've had no issues with my back, because they are connecting to that area, moving it slowly, retraining the muscle, working with the pain so the pain can release. It doesn't need to be there. It doesn't need to knock on the door and say, I'm in pain. And honestly, I'm going to share that with you because it's blown my mind with all my massage clients how effective slow motion awareness is for healing our relationship to pain. It's amazing. Anyway, went off on a tangent there. But yeah, I think from the way you say you work, you're my kind of therapist. So maybe I should book in. But yeah, so that's absolutely awesome. So I want to know a little bit more about, you've said a few things you do, so let me know a bit more about the constellation stuff. I'm very intrigued. That's not come up for us before, so let's dive into that. Tell me more.
The way I work, because I don't run constellation groups, it is with clients who want, where I feel it's useful for them to get a sense of the system that they come from. And I have a box full of tricks, if you like, toys, figures, and I will ask them to constellate, for instance, an issue, and it might be how they feel about themselves as a child. And so I would ask them to place themselves, find a representative, a figure that represents them, and then begin to put in relation to that their family of origin, maybe their extended family, maybe even other aspects of their life, like school life could be represented by a figure. And they'll stand above it, and this will take place on my practice floor, and they'll be moving these figures around. And as they do it, I'll ask them just to imagine that they are that figure and get a sense of how it is to feel where you are in relation to your child self, as mother, as father, as school friend. And then to go back and imagine themselves as maybe this child part. And the idea of it is to be able to create and stand above the system and begin to move it around. So starting with how it was and how it felt, and moving it slowly over time to constellate the way you want it to be, where you would like to place yourself in relation to these people in your constellation. And it's a very subtle and but often very powerful way for clients to be able to actually step outside the system and look at it, and also feel they have some agency with the system, that they aren't just a hostage to it, that they can move it around the way they want it. And very, very powerful process. I've taken part in quite a few myself that are group constellations, which is really how it works at its best. And it really does access the parts that other therapists can't reach. I think it's particularly good at being able to surface systemic and transgenerational trauma. So that's really how I use it in my practice.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. I deliberately didn't look it up because I knew it was coming up today. So I wanted to hear it from you. And I'm quite a visual character, so it kind of taps into that, which is good. And it sounds a bit like you get to be an observer too. I mean, I think we forget sometimes the power of being an observer of our own experience too, how empowering that is. And that kind of did change my life. And what you're saying there makes me feel a bit like that too, about being able to be that observer.
It is. It's the distance you get, and I think that when you feel that you can stand above all of this story, and you can look at it and you can see it for what it is, and also sense that you don't have to be stuck in it. It's incredibly freeing. So I do find it a useful technique to bring in with certain clients. I mean, it doesn't work for everyone, and that's where I think an integrative approach is helpful to me, that I can meet people where they are.
Yeah, because you don't want to be in a situation where you have your way of helping people, which just ends up works against you in the end, because people aren't coming for your way; they're coming for you, your space, and how you can help them. And my coach that I work with, he's got a big range of disciplines, much like yourself. And as we've gone through my journey with him, I'm going to use him long term, just as a coach generally. And I love the way he sort of sinks into me. He taps into different techniques and he tries a few things out, see what I connect with. And the bits I don't connect with, I don't judge him for that. I go, okay, that doesn't quite work for me, because I'm becoming more aware of what I need, which is in itself healing, which is great. But we did some work the other day where I would go back to a time in my life where I really struggled. I go back as me now to comfort the inner child version of me And then me and that inner child will go back further together. So me and my 12-year-old will go back to my 6-year-old. We did it on Monday. Perfect time to speak to you about it. And honestly, it blew my mind. I had a big shift about something that happened to me that I'd forgotten about. Burst into tears. It was very beautiful. I was like, holy shit, okay, right, I get it now. There's another bit I work with, and I felt so much more peaceful afterwards, just generally day to day. It did wipe me out, and I was a bit spaced out for about 24 hours, which I'm sure is totally normal. But like you said, there's another version there, isn't it? Is that different ways to approach it, depending on what the client taps into. I love all that stuff about going back and giving myself a hug. I love all that stuff. Very beautiful. Which is great. So yes, that's amazing. So I guess, the people you're working with, you said you have high flyers, high functioning people. So are they coming to you normally with depression issues and anxiety, and you're working through that, and then you discover that there's traumas along the way? Are they coming very much with a symptom to you?
More sometimes, and sometimes a problem. And often a relationship problem. That's a very common route, I think, into therapy, in my experience. I'm just trying to think about people who have started relatively recently. I would say a problem in a relationship, some sense that work has become they've become a bit disenchanted with work. I guess it's those points where people recognise that all of the coping strategies that they've been using in life are actually, they're really for the first time beginning to sense that they just don't work, and they kind of hit that wall where there is nowhere else to go with your old structure. It just doesn't work anymore. I think that's a very common experience for me in terms of how people begin their therapy journey. And it's like, for me, I recognized that when I had this major crisis, it had been building for a long time, but I just hadn't been able to see it coming. But really what had been happening was that my old coping strategies just weren't up to it anymore. They were kind of obsolete. And the whatever problems they were trying to solve, a long time ago, had long since passed, but I was still stuck in the same, with that same structure. So I think it's something around the recognition that it doesn't work anymore. The way you are doing your life doesn't work anymore, and that might show up as a symptom, and it might show up as a problem. Sometimes depression, often depression or anxiety. If it's relationship related, often it's things like realizing that a partner's feedback that you're just angry all the time, angry, grumpy, living with you is no fun, and that's often how I get, for instance, men arriving in my practice, quite often sent under duress from an unhappy partner, and that's interesting when you get people who arrive who are a little bit sceptical, have been sent because their relationship isn't working well. Always a challenge.
Yes, that often happens. That happens with massage a lot. The husband's sent to me for a massage, and they're like, "Oh, bit weird, isn't it? Having a massage from a bloke, bit weird." But then by the end of it, because I'm quite a people person, so we end up having a chat about all kinds of manly stuff. And by the end of it, they loved it. They loved it. They feel amazing. Like, oh my god, I can move my arms properly. And then they walk away, and I've got them for life. They're not going to go anywhere else. So thank you, Wise, for doing that. Brilliant. But I really like what you said there, because people can come with their actual symptom, but you're right. Someone could come to you and say, I'm really struggling with being intimate with my partner. Like, I'm really struggling to be present in lovemaking or whatever. And they start to pick up on that there's little bits about their life, parts of their life, that don't seem to quite flow as they want to, rather than it being a symptomatic issue. Like you said, it's more of an awareness of behaviour. And I guess at the end of the day, having an awareness of your behaviour is probably the hardest part to nail. So they've done that bit, which is absolutely amazing. So then you're able to work with that. And I think people who have become aware need to give themselves a lot of credit, because it's a big part of the journey, and it's key, really. And it sounds like these guys that walk into your room have had that, which I guess may come with age, I guess. and people you hang out with, but especially in workplaces, relationship with bosses. I just get so angry with my boss, I don't know why. And then you get to work on, maybe it's a problem with their dad being too authoritative.
Yeah, I'm just thinking as you're talking that actually when people come having recognised a behavioural problem that keeps reiterating itself, they are in a way probably a little further down the path towards getting somewhere with the work than someone who comes with a symptom and hasn't really understood why they have it. And because they're often what they're wanting is just for the symptom to go away, to be magicked away, rather than to have to really look at what it is expressing. And I find it very useful with clients who aren't really very willing, let's say, to roll their sleeves up and do the work at the start, to go into a bit of psychoeducation with them and actually demystify the process and explain to them why it is that we're going to be doing what we're doing. And I find that I've always found that to be very helpful. I think I don't like the idea that therapy works in mysterious ways. I don't think that's helpful. So, for instance, if I'm getting somewhere with someone and they would come to me and they've been coming for a couple of months or something, and they say, I'm really noticing there are some shifts happening. I'm just feeling a little calmer in my life these days and I'm really enjoying it. I'll say, well, let's go back and think, how did you get there? And sometimes I'll even ask them to bring the person who first came in the door into therapy into the room and put them in the chair and have a conversation and try and work out how it was you got here, so that I don't have ownership of how they got there. They know what they did.
I mean, that is so empowering too, to be able to sit there with the first session self. I mean, unbelievably empowering. And them understanding the process is a way of them understanding, them more, really, how they connect to the world and stuff. And I think that's such a wonderfully valid point too, which is great. I had a really, really good point then and it's gone. So hopefully it'll come back to me in a mo. But that's amazing. So from a trauma-informed perspective, as this is what the show is all about, what do you think is kind of, when I say the key, I'm not expecting just one sentence, but what is the key to kind of working through our trauma? Is it very much, I've always been a big believer in kind of sensing into the felt sense. You can't, if you're hiding from a sense of some sort, then you're going to struggle to heal. You need to be able to work through every sense and not fight anything or resist anything. So you think that's key to become embodied? You need to feel all things.
Yes, it is. It is very much about being able to be present with whatever is there, and when you can. So I find that one of the ways I'm working a lot with trauma is being present with what is really there is quite a complex business, and quite often being able to be present with the resistance of being where you are is a starting point. Because if you actually sit down with someone who isn't familiar with doing with being with their body, and you ask them to just notice where they are and breathe and get a sense of themselves, quite often the first response will be to want to not to do that at all, will be to clam up and stop breathing. And because there's often a belief, I think, that being present is supposed to feel a particular way. So being able to just be really where you are, including all of the resistances and all of the things that might get in the way of that, it feels really important to say that somehow, that's a big part of the process. And the way that I'm tending to work with trauma is really around parts, about understanding the different parts of a person and being able to be really present with those different parts. So when you talked earlier about dual existence, I guess you're talking about splitting, really, and the being with you in your body, with your present felt sense of what it is to notice that you have different parts of you in the room at any given time. That's the sort of work that I think is most effective, or the most effective work I'm doing at the moment, which kind of combines internal family systems work and Gestalt top dog underdog work and the constellation work. In a way, it's being able to just be with the sense of myself, and then how I am when I notice that I have all these different ways in which I am in the world that have become, if you like, different parts, different roles, different personas. I guess that's the way in which I'm working most with that felt sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense, and my point has come back to me now, thank God. Yay! I didn't want to end the call not remembering it. But it tied into what you just said there. None of what we're talking about today, I think is possible without safety. I think it's very difficult to have any healing progress without a level of safety. And to feel resistance, you need to feel safe too. Like you say, you can't just dive into the resistance, go, oh, resistance, let me sort this out. You have to be an observer of the resistance to start with. What does why is the resistance there? What can I do to give the resistance what it needs? Be it love or whatever it may be. But then it made me think about Pete Levine and pendulation, which I have to say is something that my partner is very, very big on as a mindfulness teacher, is that, with pendulation, being able to come into uncomfortable feelings and sensations, you need to have an anchor point, a safe anchor point to come back to. And I use that. I'm telling the audience now that's what I use. So when I start to meditate, I found it very difficult. It was actually giving me anxiety. Having to feel into my body was making my anxiety worse because I was spending my time avoiding it. So to tell me to sit there or lie there and feel into my anxiety is probably not the best advice in the world, is it? But what I was told to do, which I loved, is to work on finding a safe space first. And that's what I did. Okay, where's it safe in my body? To be honest, I couldn't really find anywhere to begin with, which kind of said a lot. Over time, I realised it was my hands. It was my hands. I'm a massage therapist. When I first started out, people seemed to love working with me. I knew it was my safe space because my hands are very healing. So I've always used my hands as my anchor. So then I was able to meditate, come to my hands, feel safe, come into my anxiety in my belly, come back to my hands. So get a little dip in the pool of anxiety and come out and build up resilience from the safe space to that. So do you kind of subscribe to that idea of pendulation back and forth?
Yes, absolutely. And I was just thinking as you were talking that the other ways in which clients find safety, and one of those would be, or how safety is built in a session would be, so the client comes in and you would ask the client to think about where and how he wants to position himself in the room, and to experiment a little bit with that. And what feels the right way to be here? Do you want to be a little further from me? Do you want to be a little closer? Do you want to even sit on a cushion on the floor? How do you want to, so that the client is really taking full responsibility for where he or she wants to be? And that feels so important in the safety making sense. Yes, and the anchor point is a lovely point. I was thinking about, I guess, how often for myself the belly feels like a place that I would go to. I mean, it's partly through the way I have learned how to meditate, but that would be a place where I would head for to look for an anchor point. And we all have our, so it's very, very interesting to hear about your hands. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's the you have to just be instinctive, and that was where it was. And then it became my feet, then it became my legs. So over time, I was able to do that. There's still some chest stuff going on, hence why I'll have ongoing healing work. And you still need to work on that, and that's okay. There's a few bits to tidy up, and I see it as a lifelong journey, which is not a bad thing. That's a beautiful thing. More traumas will come our way. Things could happen to us tomorrow. We need to be able to have the inner resources to do that, which kind of puts me on to my next point with, from a polyvagal perspective and the importance of self-regulation and co-regulation. So to learn effective self-regulation, you really need to have been held with co-regulation to give you those tools. And I guess for some of the stuff that you do with your clients, especially the dynamic stuff, must be quite useful because you can give them self-regulation tools that mimic a bit of your session that I guess they can take with them for self-regulation for when they stop working with you in the future. So do you subscribe to giving self-regulation practices?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and breathing is the one that springs to mind. I guess that's the obvious response there. It's amazing how people don't really understand or have such little awareness of the way they breathe. And I have found that an incredibly powerful tool to give people to take away. Body awareness generally, but particularly breathing. And just like things like feet on the ground, noticing what it's like to have feet on the ground, to feel the sense of yourself in a chair. Those sort of awarenesses, very, very simple, which I think are incredibly effective ways for people to ground themselves, especially some of these high-flying, high-functioning people who are working, very, very quickly and very high-octane environments, very ungrounded. That's what I needed. I needed grounding, really, before I could do anything.
Definitely, it's going back to that kind of being embodied again, doesn't it? And I found that, they time and time again, they talk about yoga, especially in Bessel van der Kolk stuff, about yoga just being unbelievably effective for trauma, more so than medication ever will be. I mean, medication isn't there to fix it anyway. It's there to dumb it down. But they've done so much on yoga now. Not just yoga, Tai Chi, Cardo. Is it Cardo? No, that's the food delivery. Aikido. Aikido? Yes.
Aikido?
Yeah, it's definitely not Cardo, people. But and I've started doing a lot more of that recently. Honestly, I'll put something over my eyes and do slow motion movements with my arms, and it gets me back in my body. And then you can feel what's actually going on for you. You can check in and go, wow, yeah, I'm feeling a little bit edgy today. I didn't realize that. Now I've done those movements. And becoming embodied is just so vital, isn't it, for what we're doing? And
I think that's where just to slip this in, because it is important in terms of creating safety. The relationship, the working relationally, is such a critical part of that. And when I think back to my very difficult experience with the more psychoanalytical type therapists that I had two of when I was in my 20s, I was terrified of them because I couldn't get a sense of who they were. And that may work very, very well for some people, and I know it does, because I know people who've had very effective therapy with psychoanalysts. But for me, it was just scary that I couldn't see, or I couldn't really understand who this person was. So part of the creating safety is the way I bring myself into the relationship, and that is, that's so central to Gestalt, which is this idea that there are two people in a room. You can't view the client in isolation. He exists in relationship with me. So what I do, the way I am, the way I breathe, the things I say, the way I hold myself, are all critical to his or her sense of safety. And I guess it's an obvious point to make, but it's becoming more and more recognised. I think that the relationship is the holding for all this work.
Yeah, certainly. Connection, we're built for it, aren't we? So that level of connection. And I think that's why so many people on their healing journey tend to kind of work their way through different modalities and maybe different people over time. And that's okay, because the first person was probably great. Maybe it was very cognitive, CBT potentially maybe. And that was a good place to start, because they felt very untrusting, full stop. So the practice they felt connected to, then they were able to find a therapist along the way and then work through their journey. Well, that's mine. I can't speak for everybody, but that's everybody. Every therapist I saw had their part to play, but it wasn't until I got to the last 2 or 3 I was like, yes, I did NLP for ages, and NLP is cool, but it was I was such a story guy. I was so stuck in my stories that NLP, unfortunately, was feeding more into them. So I knew I had to move to body work. Even starting to have massages was really helpful. I was very unsafe in my body. So massage was finding the right therapist to make me feel safe through touch. Boom, really allowed me to have shifts. So it's nice to know that massage isn't just about rubbing a muscle. It's so much more than that,
I'm already learning a lot from you just in this conversation about that. It's great to hear how much work you're doing that's trauma related as a massage therapist.
At the end of the day, I have to hold a space too. And what you're talking about there with the nervous system is really key. You know, as a therapist, we have to take responsibility for our nervous system because our client's going to pick up on it. So I'm very keen that when people walk through into my clinic doors for a massage, especially if it's a woman that's coming for the first time, look, I'm a 6'2" bearded chap, you know, at the end of the day, it is what it is. And she may feel a bit uncomfortable to begin with. It's my job to make sure she feels super safe with me. And that involves lots of eye contact, high prosody voice, asking, you know, questions that will make them feel connected to me, sharing something about my day even. Oh God, it was a crazy day over. It was so hot in the car. People love that stuff. They want to know I'm a real person that drives a car, not just there to be quiet while I massage your back. So I've kind of learned over time that I have to take responsibility for my client, make sure they feel super safe, because the massage is on a whole other level for them then, because they let go to me, so I can really work through their muscle tissue. 10 times a better massage for them in the end, and that's on them feeling safe, really. I just want to thank you so much. And this is your opportunity now to give us like a finale insight, something that you feel the audience needs to hear. Remember, this is the last episode, so it needs to be pretty epic. But
no pressure.
This is your time. Anything that you feel we haven't talked about, or what would be your parting message to anybody listening right now who may be going through some stuff, should we say?
Well, I think that what I have recognised is that it's very hard. I mean, this is not rocket science, what I'm about to say, but I think it's the most helpful, one of the most helpful insights that I've gathered and am gathering as I journey down the path as a therapist, which is that it's very hard for us to be forgiving and kind to ourselves, and we can really imagine that we are doing very good work around working with the self-critic, but the self-critic is so subtle in the way it finds ways to escape and evade our attempts to kind of bring it in and on the radar. And I think honouring all of the ways in which you have survived as a person, even though you might look back on them and think, oh my God, that is really messed up, the way I've got through life. If you can really honour the parts of you that have got you to where you are today, I think it's a fantastic start for journeying further with yourself. And one of the ways in which people get very stuck, I think, in therapy is the difficulty to forgive themselves, because the idea self-improvement over self-acceptance, I think, is something that people get very stuck in. They want to come to therapy wanting to be better than they are, rather than to be who they are. And that can play out in very subtle ways. And I'm amazed, even having done a lot of work, and I have done decades of work, how elusive my self-critic is and how clever it is at being able to find its way around my defences. And that would be I think that would be the thing I would want to say to everyone is who is listening and wants to start a therapy journey, is thinking about it or already has done, is just to really honour all of those parts of you that have got you to where they are, because even though where you are is not where you necessarily want to be, you've survived, you've done it. It's incredibly creative the way we navigate our way through the difficulties of life, and I think those parts of us need to be championed and understood and embraced.
Thank you. That's really, really lovely. And it just makes me think a lot about, people talk about self-acceptance a lot, but you need to have compassion with it too. Self-compassion is huge. Like you said, be compassionate about where you've been, where you've got to. And I always like to say, and this is kind of finale for me at the end of this series, which is, you've always done the best you can with the resources you have in that moment, And if I've learned anything from NLP, quite often everything we're doing is done for some positive manner to protect us, even if it's a negative action. It has a positive meaning behind it from a survival perspective. So, you did the best you could with the resources you have. So all I've done for the last 10 years is gained more resources so I can kind of heal on my journey. And I want to touch on something you said that I forgot to mention earlier on, which is really when they come into that space, in the healing space with you, the therapy space, the actual healing is happening with them. They're the ones healing. You're there to guide them, hold the space, and be there for them if they have any questions, I guess. But the healing is actually within them. You're not healing them. They are generating that within themselves, and you're resourcing them with it. I love that way of looking at it. It's very much a relationship, a co-regulation environment, which is amazing. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for this. I've absolutely loved it. So what does the future hold for you then? What does life look like a couple of years from now? What will you be up to?
Well, I imagine I'll probably end up doing a bit more supervision to therapy. I think that ratio will probably change. I love working with therapists, supervising their work, and I think you've got to have a lot of experience to be able to do that, and I'm building that up. So I see more of that, probably a bit more group work, and potentially training other people to run groups. And there's some work I'd like to do around training men to run their own support groups, and I certainly see a bit more of that. I think there's a very interesting question that really faces all us therapists, which is, to what extent are we going to be going back to seeing people in person? But that feels like it's really up for grabs, and I would be very sad if therapy is reduced to Skype and Zoom work only, and it may be that lots of people will choose that now that they've experienced it and it's working, and they don't want to have to get on a train and come into London to see me. So I'm interested, a little concerned about that aspect of how the pandemic will have affected us and our work, and I'm open to whatever possibilities arise. So I think that's where I am with it.
I think, you're right there. I think there'll always be a place for both. I'd much rather see someone in person. I have to say, I can't wait to go and see my coach in person for the first time. We've had loads of sessions, but can't wait to drive over and see him. I'm always going to prefer that from a co-regulation perspective. So I think there'll still be plenty of people who want that. Well, I hope so, especially from a massage perspective. It doesn't work any other way. But July 4th in the UK, that's when especially salons and stuff reopen. So I'm massaging again from July 4th. I'm so excited after 3 months out. And I thought, I'm not sure if anyone's going to book, obviously, because they're going to be a bit worried. But I've got 6 clients in the first day within 24 hours of announcing it. So clearly people have got a lot of pain right now, and they're weighing up the risk of surviving with this pain or having, hopefully no more than a 10% chance of getting the virus. But I'm going to do every, hygiene thing under the sun, obviously, which is fine. Oh,
I'm really pleased to hear you've got people coming, and you feel you'll be back into the normal swing of things. That's encouraging to hear. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I love the power touch, and I've missed touching as well. I've missed, I didn't realize how important it was to me, to connect people on that level. So very, very excited. I know that you, me and Kenny, if people are regulars on this, listening to these shows, that you, me and Kenny may be doing some stuff together too, with some shows. So I'm really excited to talk about that more. So look out for that, guys. Me, Simon and Kenny may do some stuff together, which would be awesome. Awesome. I'm not going to ask you where we can find you online website-wise, because I know there's some website issues for you at the moment, which is for another day. There's trauma there in itself. So I will put links to what I guess will be on your website when this goes out in a couple of weeks. But you're on Facebook, aren't you? I liked your page today. So
yes, and I'm on various directories. The website will be up and running soon enough, I'm sure, by the time this is out. So yeah, people can find me on the London Psychotherapist website for sure. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah, you'd be on that directory too, wouldn't you? Yeah. Anyway, I'll put links to everything under the video description. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and being with us for the whole series. If you have been, I just want to thank everybody so much for all the downloads we're getting, all the views, all the shares. People seem to be really connecting with this show, and me, the guys, the girls, everybody involved is so excited to do more of this for Series 2. Thank you to all our patrons too that support me on Patreon. Your donations every month allow me more time to do this, which is great. I still have a job, I still do massage, but your money really helps me have a bit more time to do what I love so much, which is meeting amazing people like Simon, which is really, really cool. So thank you very much for tuning in, and we will see you for Series 2, where we have a very exciting first episode, but I'm not going to tell you quite yet. So that's that. Take care, everybody. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon. Take care.